Disco Elysium won 8 major awards out of its 17 nominations, making it one of the most successful game releases of 2019. But in just 4 years, everything would collapse. The game's creators would be ousted, the studio behind it would be in the process of being sued, and the world would be left watching as its messy internal politics unfolded in real time. This is the story of how Disco Elysium was allegedly stolen from its creators. When the game first released, it was regarded as a masterpiece, thanks in large part to 3 key figures: Robert Kovitz, the lead writer and designer, Alexander Rostov, the lead artist, and Helen Hinper, the writer behind the game's complex and extensive dialogue. What most people didn't know was that Kovitz had been building the world of Elysium long before the game was even an idea, all the way back in the early 2000s, when he and Rostov were parts of something called the Overcoats. Over time, they would evolve into something called ZAUM, a cultural movement and a creative outlet for their ideas. Kovitz would get his first real opportunity over here. In 2013, with the help of businessman, writer and fellow ZAUM member Kor Kendo, he would publish a novel set in the same world as the game. It was called Sacred and Terrible Air. This would be the first written story from the world of Elysium. Now, unfortunately for the pair, the book wouldn't do too well. It would be a commercial failure, only managing to sell about 1,000 copies. Kovitz would take this quite hard, falling into a deep depression. This would last until 2014, when Kendo would return to him once again, this time with a new proposition, a video game. With Kovitz, Rostov and Hinper on board now, ZAUM Studio was established in October 2015, with work on the game formally beginning in the very next year. Now, even with Kendo's backing, funds for the studio were still pretty tight, and so to help fill the gap came Margus Linname, an Estonian businessman who became the company's main investor and the majority shareholder. Over time, 2 other figures would become increasingly involved as well: Ilmar Kompis, who would later take over as the CEO, and Tonis Havel, who would serve as the game's executive producer. As the team continued to grow, developers, artists and writers all worked long hours, motivated to fulfill the game's vision. Prototypes evolved, systems were built, and the world of Elysium gradually took shape. On October 15, 2019, after nearly 4 years of development, Disco Elysium was finally released. Now, fast forward just 4 years later, an article by Martin Luiga, the editor of Disco Elysium, appeared online, titled "The Dissolution of the ZAUM Cultural Association." At first, this just seemed like a routine announcement, simply marking the closure of the cultural collective founded by Kovitz and Rostov. Luiga even clarified that this association was not the same as the ZAUM behind Disco Elysium, but while making that distinction, he added something far more significant. In the article, he wrote the following: "I would note that neither Kovitz, Hinper nor Rostov are working there since the end of last year, and their leaving the company was involuntary. These were the core members behind Disco Elysium, and this was the first anyone was hearing about them being fired. Fans at this point were still expecting an announcement for the sequel, so news like this caught them completely off guard. And for those who doubted the claim, their fears were confirmed just a day later when Rostov himself tweeted confirming this rumor. In an interview, Luiga elaborated further, claiming that the firings had been carried out under false premises. So let's just say, by this point, things were starting to get complicated. On the 9th of November, ZAUM released a press statement alleging that Kovitz and Rostov had been fired for ignoring responsibilities and mistreating co-workers. In a report by the Estonian Express, they quoted Kompis, the CEO, as saying, "Robert is said to have been known for belittling women and co-workers in the past, but this was previously unknown to the company. It would be very short-sighted of a growing international company to tolerate such behavior." Okay, so that's one side's response. And if you thought that was crazy, wait till you hear the other. Kovitz and Rostov released their own statements on the very same day. According to them, there was a much bigger scandal at play. They said that the current owners of ZAUM had taken control illegitimately and had kicked them out when they began asking questions. Okay, I feel like we need to pause here, because what exactly did they mean by legitimately taking control? Well, let me break this down for you. But before we do that, we are so close to hitting 200 subs, so if you're enjoying this so far, please subscribe and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Okay, Back to the video. Alright, so here's what actually happened, or at least what's alleged to have happened. When Disco Elysium's development first started, the company's ownership was split between Core Kender and Margus Linnamay. Kender would sell his stakes pretty early into development though, and these would now belong to Ilmar Compass. Once the game launched, however, there was an agreement in place allowing the company to buy back its shares if the game performed well, and redistribute them among key figures. So following the game's success, here's what the company's shares look like. Kovitz, Rostov and Kender each had around 10.2%. Compass's shares increased to 22.4% and Linnamay's dropped to 46.8%, meaning that he was no longer a majority shareholder. So if we look at how the shares were divided at this point, things actually looked pretty good. No single person had complete decision-making power, meaning that any major move would require a collective agreement. Well, that wouldn't last very long. In 2021, Linnamay wanted to sell, and so he did, to Ilmar Compass, bringing Compass's ownership now to 69.1%. To make things even worse, Kovitz and Rostov claimed that they weren't even aware of the sale until after it had already happened. They only realized that something was off when they were suddenly demoted inside the company, and only after checking Estonia's corporate registry did they discover that Compass was now the majority owner. That's when they started asking questions, and that's when they were fired. Now I want you to keep paying attention here, because this gets even worse. Not having them involved in the sale wasn't the illegitimate bit that they were referring to. They alleged that Compass didn't actually pay for the shares using his own money, but instead used the company's own funds to pay for them. Here's how they say it worked. A shell company controlled by Compass called Tureke supposedly bought 4 early concept sketches for a project called Pioneer 1 from ZAUM for a grand total of £1. They then immediately restole them back to the company for 4.8 million euros. Yeah, you heard that right. That 4.8 million, according to the allegations, was then used to buy Linnamay's shares, effectively giving Compass control of the company using its own money. Okay, that was a lot to take in. So where do we go from here? Well, for starters, the court proceedings. As you'd expect, Kovitz, Rostov and Core Kender filed a lawsuit against ZAUM. This led to the freezing of Tureke's shares, preventing Compass and Havel from selling or transferring ownership of the company while the case was under investigation. The company responded by denying all accusations of frauds. The lawyers claimed that the 4.8 million transaction was legit, and by November 11, Tureke even repaid that back to ZAUM, which many took as an attempt to defuse the situation. Following this, a month later, Kender would officially withdraw his lawsuit as well, saying that he had achieved his goal. But that wasn't the end of it, not even close, because Kovitz and Rostov continued their legal fight, maintaining that even though the money had been paid back, the original sale had still been unlawful and they had still been wrongfully dismissed. It's worth mentioning now that an independent source of reporting, notably a long People Makes Games documentary, while trying to investigate these claims, selected interviews from quite a few ZAUM employees, and even though many of these interviews seem to support the company's claims, the PMG report has been criticized quite a bit, since a lot of these testimonies came from people who were still working at ZAUM at the time, directly under the new leadership. Since the original creator's departure, a lot has changed. For starters, several new studios have emerged that claim a piece of the Disco Elysium legacy. Notable ones include Red Info Limited, formed by Kovitz, Rostov and Hinper, Dark Math Games, co-founded by Core Kender, Longdew Games involving Martin Luiga, and Summer Eternal, a worker co-op run by former ZAUM staff. ZAUM itself has moved forward with new projects such as C4 and a mobile Elysium title. However, many former writers and designers have since left the company, and multiple planned Elysium projects have been cancelled. As of November 2025, the legal case remains ongoing in Estonia, with no public verdict yet. The studio continues to operate, but the fight over who truly owns Disco Elysium is still far from over. Now, if you enjoyed this video and were looking for more, check out how another studio was destroyed after releasing its masterpiece. Or if you're looking for something else entirely, I've also made a video on how a simple challenge went on to redefine how Pokemon will be played going forward.